from CTC. So on our agenda today, we're going to provide an overview of federal changes to the BEAD rules, overview of the benefit of the bargain round, priority broadband applications, some more information about those, some information about project area design, the scoring rubric that will be used in the subgrantee selection process, and changes to the project application that will be apparent when people resubmit their applications and or new applications. And then I will close out by going over some final reminders. Next slide, please. So this is a complicated screen, but there are 4 important reminders for people. One is keep an eye on the chat and Q&A functions. We'll be putting helpful links and or comments in those functions. In addition, the slides for this webinar, along with the recording, will be posted on our website as soon as we're able to do that. And the slides that will be posted will have links also. There'll be a way to access the information. If you have a question, put them in the Q&A or email them to us at beadgrant, that's one word, beadgrant, at cpuc.ca.gov. We will not be able to answer questions during the webinar today, but we will be building our FAQ to address frequently asked questions. And as a reminder, we did recently update our FAQ, and that went out earlier today. There was a reminder sent out, so there's a new version of the FAQ that reflects the changes to the program. If you're interested, closed captions are available. Select the Show Closed Caption button on the toolbar. And then finally, we recommend it's best to select the side-by-side speaker mode for the best viewing experience. In just a minute, I will turn it over to Joanne. I do want to remind folks that we will be launching the project application window tomorrow on Saturday, and it'll be open for 2 weeks. And also that we will be posting quite a bit of additional information on our website today, including a revised project application guide. But Joanne will discuss more of this. With that, I turn it over to Joanne Hovis, President of CTC Technology and Energy. Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks, Jonathan. Just to check, as always, technology check, are you hearing me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine, Joanne.
Okay, great, thanks. Good morning, everyone. As always, it's a real pleasure to be with you, and I'm going to take you through the agenda that Jonathan just summarized, starting, of course, with an overview of the recent federal changes to the BEAD rules. Can I have the next slide, please? As I think you all know, and as we talked about last time, we had one of these webinars. The National Telecommunications and Information Administration of the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is the entity charged by Congress in the IIJA with overseeing the work done by the states on the BEAD program. NTIA issued the BEAD restructuring policy notice on June 6th. And that policy notice makes very substantial changes in the rules and terms and processes that the states, as the eligible entities for administering these funds and subawarding them to applicants, awardees in their states, that the states have to comply with. The month of June was largely spent understanding those rules, building strategy and process, and aligning the application, the grants management system, and all other kinds of mechanisms to the new rules in order to meet the federal timeline and the new federal requirements, which are quite substantial in their changes relative to the rules that were in place under the previous administration. There is a link here and at the end of this deck, and of course on the CPUC's BEAD website, to this restructuring policy notice. And it's a relatively brief document of only 23 pages, but I strongly recommend it as a resource for understanding what the federal government is requiring of the CPUC and all the other eligible entities among the states for purposes of what is being called the benefit of the bargain round, the new requirement around a process to subaward BEAD funds. Can I have the next slide, please? A few highlights of the changes that are likely to be quite impactful for applicants, both with regard to preparing their applications, preparing and submitting their applications, but then also with regard to what compliance with federal rules will entail once awards have been made. The first one is that there are certain requirements that were not based in the statute that created Bead, the IIJA, but had been included by the previous administration. And those requirements have been largely eliminated by NTIA in the current administration, as reflected in the June 6th policy notice. This includes such things as climate reporting, open access requirements, middle-class affordability plans, and other items of that sort. What you will see is that those items are discussed as no longer binding and not requiring answers in the application. And this is discussed extensively in the application guide. And for those who receive awards, those federal requirements will no longer be commitments or obligations of your award. The second very substantial change is something that the federal government calls technology neutrality. And what this really means is that the new rules do not allow states to make categorical decisions based on a particular broadband technology for whether that technology should receive priority treatment under the IIJA. The IIJA, in creating Bead, noted that there would be certain projects that should receive priority for determinations of what projects get funded. And in the previous administration, who would be a priority project and who would not, or what would be and what would not, was determined based on certain kinds of technology categories. What the current administration and the new rules require is that there be no categorical determination of that type, but that the states must analyze data to be submitted by the applicants and determine based on that data whether a given proposal in a given area meets the requirements of the definition of a priority project. So a new process necessary for applicants to submit data and states to review that data. And we'll talk in some detail in just a few minutes about what that means for purposes of your grant application. As you all know, there was a required reopening of pre-qualification. That process has taken place. It closed yesterday, and pre-qualification applications submitted are under review. Those who were previously pre-qualified are automatically pre-qualified for the benefit of the bargain round. And then going into the benefit of the bargain round, the federal government is requiring that every state conduct at least a single grant selection round for every Bead eligible location. And that is what we're going to talk about in detail today. And that opportunity to submit applications. The portal will open tomorrow with all of the relevant materials becoming available on the CPUC website today. Next, and very critical, scoring has been quite dramatically changed under the new rules. There was very prescriptive and extensive scoring requirements required under the old rules, and NTIA in the policy notice eliminated that scoring rubric requirement, all of it, and created a new scoring requirement that relies on effectively cost, or what is called minimum bead outlay. And then in some limited conditions, there is some secondary scoring, and we'll talk about all of that in detail in a few minutes as well. The changes in scoring notably required absolutely mandated by the new policy notice. And then finally, as you all know, there is a 90-day deadline for compliance with all requirements for every state to go through the process that is required by the IIJA and by the policy notice to get to a final proposal. And that 90-day clock started to run on June 6th when the policy notice was released. Can I have the next slide, please? So with that overview, let's start now talking about the benefit of the bargain round. And I'm going to overview that at a high level as well, and then we'll dive in detail on some of the key issues. The first thing to know is that if you previously submitted a project application in the round that was underway when the policy notice was released on June 6th. You may update and resubmit that application. And we'll talk in a few minutes about everything you must do in order to update and resubmit, but you need not start from scratch unless you choose to. Whether you submitted a project application previously or not, there is new information that is required, that was not required in the earlier round, but is now required because of the new rules that were put out by the federal government as part of the policy notice. And we'll talk about what those are, but please note, whether you've submitted an application in the past or not, there will be additional information that must be completed in order for your application to be complete. The benefit of the bargain round will open tomorrow, and the materials, as Jonathan say, will be available on the CPUC's Bead website. And as I think you all know, there's a relatively short time frame here for all of us. That is the case for all of the states, as well as all of the applicants throughout the country. And there is a significant effort underway to make this as smooth and fast and compliant, and hopefully as simple for all of you as possible, to make participation as easy as possible while still complying with the federal rules under which the state is mandated to run the benefit of the bargain round. Can I have the next slide? So participation, we touched on this a little bit on the past slide, but you should know that if you applied in that earlier round that was terminated by the policy notice, your applications will be carried over into the new format so that you can update them, add to them as necessary, select your addresses for your proposed application as necessary, and then resubmit your application. So there is still work that needs to be done if you are resubmitting an old application, but some of this has already been populated for you so that you can, wherever possible, amend your application rather than have to start from scratch. New applicants, you will have an opportunity to submit a full application, and for all applicants, both returning and new, pre-qualification participation is obviously required. That process is now complete. And in addition, there is an extensive application guide and other set of guide materials that will be on the CPUC's Bead webpage. Can I have the next slide, please? It's important to know that under the new federal rules, the CPUC, like every eligible entity at the state level, was required to update the locations that are eligible for the Bead program. And the new lists of broadband serviceable locations and community anchor institutions that are eligible for this program will be posted on the CPUC's Bead website, and then will be available to you to work with in the Bead portal in designing your grant areas. The changes, and there's considerable detail on this in the policy notice if you'd like to understand why the federal government mandated these changes, but briefly, these changes will include addition of a small number of newly eligible locations that qualify for Bead. It would include removal of fixed wire of locations that have adequate unlicensed fixed wireless service that are proven to have Bead qualified performance. These were not removed from the map under the old Bead rules. Under the new Bead rules, however, there was a process for analyzing these, and where the proven performance is there, to remove those locations from the map. That was one of the substantial changes made under the policy notice. There are some minimal community anchor institution address or location adjustments based on the new federal rules. And then wherever there is a location with a new enforceable commitment, or a location that's been removed from the FCC's most recent fabric, those locations are identified on the map. Can I have the next slide? So We were talking about the timeline a moment ago. I know you were all aware of this. This is the case in California and in every other state and territory that is participating in the Bead program. There is a federal timeline that is now the framework for how long each state may take to undertake its entire process, including putting out its application, accepting applications, reviewing them, analyzing the negotiations if possible, and so on, and then filing a final proposal following the mandated federal processes, such as meetings with the federal government and a public comment period, and then, of course, state process as well. This is a very tight timeline. The timeline is tight for the states. It is tight for the applicants. We're very aware of this. What this means is that unlike just about any broadband grant program that has been run, not just in California, but frankly, in any state in the country in the past, there is not enough time to go through rounds of revisions to correct errors or deficiencies or omissions or anything like that. Ideally, there would be time for all of that, but it's simply not pragmatic for the CPUC to be able to meet the deadline mandated by the federal government here to be compliant with federal rules. As a result, we are asking, please be sure that your applications are correct, that they are complete, that you have checked and double checked all of your submissions, uploaded the correct documents, used the correct templates, checked numbers, and so on. If there are errors or omissions, there will not be time to correct them during the review process. Thanks for understanding that. This is a timeline everyone is working under. And we know how very fast the turnaround on this is. That is a matter of federal policy. Can I have the next slide, please? So here is some more detail on the timeline. As you all know, the pre-qualification process was reopened on the 11th and then closed yesterday at 6 o'clock. The benefit of the bargain round will open tomorrow and will close at 6 o'clock Pacific time on August 2nd. Please be aware that at 6 o'clock Pacific time, the portal will no longer be available and all applications must have been successfully submitted by that time in order to receive consideration. Of course, there will be a final proposal prepared after that and then submitted to the federal government, and a comment period that will also make available the opportunity for public comment that will be received, analyzed, and incorporated as appropriate. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, now let's dive into the contents of the benefit of the bargain round. You'll recall that I said earlier in overviewing the notable policy changes in the policy notice that are substantially different to the rules that were in use in the previous iteration of Bead, that the determination of which projects get priority status for selection before other projects, that determination was under the previous administration made on a categorical basis by the federal government, with certain technologies assigned to the priority category, namely end-to-end fiber, and certain technologies assigned to not priority, or another category called alternative technology. That categorical framework is no longer in place. What we have now is a definition of priority broadband project, which you see here, and you can see the discussion of it if you are interested in the policy notice. It is talked about at some length by the federal government about how this definition was arrived at, largely based on the statute. Here is the definition, and then the policy notice requires that states conduct an application by application, project by project determination of whether the data submitted by an applicant about their proposed network in that specific proposed set of locations meets the definition of priority broadband project. Stated otherwise, states may not say a certain technology will always qualify as priority, a certain technology will always not qualify as priority. Rather, states have to, on a neutral basis, analyze every individual application to determine which category it goes into based on the specific design and related components of what is proposed for that network in the locations for which that network is proposed. That means that regardless of technology, all applications are eligible for consideration as to whether they meet the definition of priority. And that includes all of the technologies that are listed here. Can I have the next slide, please? So what does this look like in terms of the process? The policy notice requires that applicants provide the data to the states to allow the states to make this determination. And so the CPUC's project application will ask for certain kinds of information to allow the CPUC to make the priority determination on an informed and data-driven basis. First, there will be information about the proposal's design, what the network design is, and the elements of that network design. And that is pretty typical of any grant program that any of us have participated in the past to know what is proposed, what will be built with the funds that have been requested. And then in addition, the application will contain certain templates that applicants can download and populate with information about the project's design and specifications that will enable the CPUC to make the priority determination in a data-driven and informed way. Can I have the next slide? Here you see an overview of the kind of information that is requested in the application, and you will all shortly be able to see the templates that request this information. You need only fill out the templates for the type of technology that you are proposing in your grant application. I think that is self-evident. If you are proposing a hybrid, so hypothetically, perhaps a combination of fiber and unlicensed fixed wireless, if you are proposing a combined hybrid application of multiple technologies, you must fill out for all of the technologies you are proposing in that application. But for any technology you are not proposing, obviously, please just ignore the templates that are for those technologies. And what you see here is some of the elements that are requested in the templates for each technology. These are obviously specific to the characteristics of how that technology performs, and an example of that being tower sites being appropriate for a fixed wireless network, but not for a fiber to the premises network or hybrid fiber coaxial network. So asking for the appropriate information to enable that data-driven, informed analysis of whether the specific application meets the definition of priority. Each of these templates has an instruction manual. They are all within the portal. They are there designed to help you to undertake this effort and do this work. And let me note also, these templates are designed to be as low burden as possible. Every effort has been made to make it relatively straightforward and doable for applicants to participate in this program and to file hopefully as many applications as they have an interest in and see a business opportunity for. So for example, when you look at the templates, it will be a spreadsheet of locations, and that may at first blush look burdensome. It is not. It is designed to enable you to populate it by simply copying and pasting from the modeling tools that are universally used to design a network for purposes of a grant application. It is not designed to elicit any kind of row by row, cell by cell manual population of the spreadsheet, but rather to be a relatively simple transfer of data from the tools that are almost universally used to prepare a grant application to the templates that will allow the CPUC to make this determination in a way that's based on your data. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, let's talk now about designing the project that you are proposing in any given application. The next slide, please. So as you will recall, the CPUC's plan for Bead has been all along that there are project area units that applicants may combine as they see fit into a single application, so long as they are adjacent to each other. We'll talk about what adjacency means in just a moment. And those project area units are made up of census block groups and tribal lands. Wherever the tribal lands are different to the census block group boundaries, the tribal lands are what determines the outline of a given project area unit. Multiple project area units can be combined into a single application, so long as they are adjacent to each other. And adjacency for these purposes includes if there is a project area unit between two eligible project area units, and the one in between does not have any eligible bead locations, that is still considered adjacency. It's not considered a separation. So long as that project area unit does not have eligible bead locations, it may be considered as an adjacent PAU for purposes of combining PAUs into a single application. So this was always the framework for the Bead program in California. This was developed in 2023 in writing the initial proposal, volume 2, based in large part on public comment. And it remains the same for purposes of the Bead program under the benefit of the bargain round rules that are in the policy notice. What has changed, however, is that there is no longer a requirement of serving 100% of locations or providing pricing for 100% of locations within a given PAU, or the option of providing pricing and a service commitment for 90% of locations. That has now been removed under the new rules. Under the new rules, the federal government has mandated that states allow applicants to remove select high-cost locations from their applications. So applicants may do that. You do not have to apply for 100% of locations, but there is a requirement that each proposal proposed to serve at least 60% of the eligible broadband serviceable locations across the entirety of the proposal. So 60% across all the census block groups and tribal lands, or I should say 60% across all the project area units that are combined into that single proposal. As you will recall, we talked about this a few minutes ago. The list of eligible locations has changed slightly. So even if you applied in the first round, you should know that there might be some modest changes to the locations in the PAUs in which you are interested. So please check the new data. In addition, there is a need, even if you applied in the first round and are going to edit your existing application, you will need to reselect your locations. We'll talk about that in a minute. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. I think I have covered this in some detail already, but I'm going to repeat it. The types of PAUs, the types of project area units have not changed. They remain census block groups and tribal areas, and those are the building blocks that applicants may combine with each other into a single application to build a larger project area. And that includes all PAUs that are adjacent to each other, including PAUs with no eligible locations. They can be included as an adjacency so as to show adjacency between two PAUs that have eligible locations. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. What has changed about application area design? Well, as I said a moment ago, the requirement to apply for 100% of eligible locations in a PAU or in a combined project area has been removed. There is no requirement at 100%. There is a minimum coverage threshold of 60% of eligible broadband serviceable locations in the project area, that is to say, in the combination of PAUs that the applicant has combined for a single application. In addition, the minimum threshold for including low-income areas and disadvantaged community locations has been removed. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the 60% threshold requirements. Again, applicants may remove high-cost locations from a proposed application if they so choose, but across all of their PAUs, they may not remove more than 40% of locations. So please design your areas accordingly. Please note also that, as I think you all know, on the map, there are locations that are marked as indicated. They have been marked that way under federal guidance. And those are locations that have not been removed by the map, but are unlikely to receive BEAD funding because there are other pending enforceable commitments for those locations to get deployment through some other mechanism. So those locations still on the map, but indicated so that you know that they may not be eligible for funding. You may include them in a proposal if you like, but they will not count toward the required 60% location threshold. And you should know that it is not guaranteed that they will be eligible for BEAD funding. In the application portal, you will see that you're able to, in designing your grant area, deselect locations, remove them from your proposed grant area, or you can simply upload a list of the locations you propose to serve. And the portal will calculate whether you are meeting the 60% threshold or not. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. The policy notice is very specific in noting that NTIA will potentially reject an award that a state wishes to make if NTIA believes that the costs are excessive, as determined by NTIA based on the cost characteristics of the area and a number of other items. Again, it's well worth reading the policy notice to see the public policy rationale for these new rules. So it is important to know that an award that is considered by the federal government to be excessive in cost may be disallowed by the federal government when the federal government is reviewing the selections of the CPUC. We are not, however, able to define exactly what excessive cost means. NTIA has not shared if there is a particular number or a threshold or a ceiling on what it is willing to spend on a per location or a per area basis. And so we are not able to say excessive cost is at X, and therefore X is the ceiling on what can be spent, because that is simply not yet clear. we just encourage all applicants to please be aware that applications and projects must be cost effective, and that there is a consideration that very high cost projects or excessively costly projects will be disallowed by the federal government. And I'll move on to the next slide, please. Let's talk about scoring now. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the policy notice dramatically changes the rules, the scoring rubric that must be used by the states for scoring BEAD programs. Next slide, please. So the policy notice makes the sole principal priority, the sole principal determination of score to be cost, what is called minimal BEAD outlay. According to the policy notice, the states have to select among priority projects based on the lowest cost. So if there are priority projects that are in the same general project area, they will be, the selection will be made based on which one is lower cost. By the way, in a general project area that does not have any priority projects, but where there are competing non-priority projects, the same rule applies. In that general project area, the lowest cost application will be selected. However, it's important to note that if there are two priority projects competing with each other in the same general project area, and they are within 15% of each other's cost, the CPUC may then select based on secondary scoring criteria that are not cost-driven. So cost is the key determination in comparing two priority projects or two non-priority projects where there are no priority options. Cost is the key determination unless the lowest cost proposal is within 15% of the next lowest cost, in which case the selection can be made based on secondary scoring criteria. Can I have the next slide, please? The secondary scoring criteria that are offered by NTIA for developing the rubric are speed to deployment and the speed of network. Can I have the next slide? The CPUC has built the following, or this rubric that you see here, for assigning points based on these secondary scoring criteria for those circumstances where secondary scoring becomes relevant. Again, that is only going to be if in the same general project area, there are two priority applications that are within 15% of each other in cost. And the criteria here are out of a total number of points of 100, 10 points for demonstrating that the project can be complete within 36 months of award, and then up to 90 points for demonstrating that the project will be capable of delivering the speeds in the upload and in the download direction that you see here. So hypothetically, if an application shows that the project will be complete within 36 months of award, it gets 10 points. If it also then shows that the project will be capable of delivering more than or equal to 100 megabits per second, but less than 500 megabits per second in both the upload and the download direction, getting another 25 points, that hypothetical application would be awarded 35 points. And if it is within 15% in that circumstance I mentioned, in which secondary criteria become the determination, that 35 points would be compared to the number of points that were awarded to the competing application for determination of which application would receive the award. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does all of this look like as you all start to assemble your project applications? The next slide. This is going to look like a lot of text and a lot of words, but I just want to note that there is an application guide and other support materials that are on the CPUC's Bead web page that are designed to make this hopefully as easy and as straightforward as possible. I'm going to take you through each of these elements. First, in order to be compliant with the policy notice, the CPUC has removed, edited, and added questions to the application. What you'll see is that the application guide is available on the website in both redline and clean versions, so you can see exactly where the changes have been made in the project application relative to the application that was used in the earlier round of Bead that was effectively canceled by the policy notice. The questions that have been edited or added to are in a new section. This is section 11, which is called Addendum. And all applicants, both new and returning, must complete section 11. New applicants will need to complete sections 1 through 13, but previous applicants who are choosing to edit their previous application will not have to complete all of those, but they must complete section 11, which is the new section with the edited or added questions that are designed to be compliant with the policy notice. Importantly, returning applicants must also reselect their locations and PAUs in section 2, must reselect and resubmit those and respond to any of the questions that relate to location selection, that are dependent on location selection. So if you already filed an application, you can update the responses from the prior applications to those questions. You can allow the previous submitted responses to stand if you believe they are still appropriate to your application. But you must resubmit location and PAU data. Importantly, with regard to the questions that have been removed or edited that are no longer permitted under the policy notice, if you responded to those in the earlier iteration of the Bead process, the CPUC will disregard those answers. You need not worry about it, and any implied commitments are no longer relevant because there are no longer federal mandates around those public policy considerations. Can I have the next slide? Okay, that's a big overview of what's coming with regard to the application. Let's talk now in some detail about section 2, which is the section in which applicants select the locations that they would like to have in the application that they will submit for the benefit of the bargain round. So even if you are using a previous application and amending it, you will need to reselect your locations and your PAUs. They have been cleared from previously submitted project applications. So both new and returning applicants must look at the updated set of eligible locations, select the proposed PAUs and the locations that you would like to assemble into your proposed project area. Importantly, an applicant that selects locations on tribal lands will find that the portal autofills accordingly in question 5.13, the relevant question in the project application regarding whether the proposed project includes locations on tribal lands. And also, very importantly, the applications have a limit of 850 project area units per project application. So in any given project application, you will not be able to select more than 850 PAUs. As a reminder, PAUs are either census block groups or tribal lands. If you wish to apply for more than 850 adjacent PAUs, please submit more than one application. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. So As I discussed a couple of minutes ago, under the new policy notice, under the new rules, applicants may choose to exclude select high-cost locations that they do not wish to apply for. That is a requirement of the new rules, and it is also a mechanism for trying to provide a cost-effective application that does not run the risk of NTIA's excessive cost concern, which again, we do not have a numerical number for, but we know that they will be concerned about funding anything that is excessively costly. So how do you go about doing this? In selecting your PAUs and selecting your locations, you can deselect individual locations in a PAU by clicking X on the location from the list in that selected project area. This is all detailed, by the way, in the application guide, but you will see is that the portal is designed to make this as simple as possible for you. The locations that you select to exclude will be excluded based on certain kinds of colors that will give you that indication. And you may do that deselecting specific locations, or optionally, you may upload a file in the appropriate format with the locations that you do propose to serve in the selected project area, rather than deselecting the individual locations that you propose not to serve. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the portal, once you have done all of this, will automatically calculate whether you are meeting the minimum required 60% coverage threshold for a given application. Can I have the next slide, please? Now, Section 11, as you'll recall, is the new section that includes the amended or the added questions that are necessary under the new rules of the June 6th policy notice. And Section 11, therefore, is something that both returning and new applicants must fill out, much like Section 2. So Section 11 includes the new questions and templates that are required in order to demonstrate that your project meets the requirements, meets the definition of a priority broadband project. We talked about that just a few minutes ago, about the different questions and technology categories. It includes the new list and the associated templates for that. It includes instructions for identifying locations that may be ineligible for Bead or that are not considered Bead eligible, not considered broadband serviceable locations. It asks for certification that the applicant offers a low-cost service offering. It has questions that will be used to determine the secondary scoring that is awarded to each applicant. It has updated pro forma and budget narrative templates, which have been designed to be streamlined and hopefully as low burden as possible to complete. It has updated certifications that align with the requirements of the policy notice, and then updated letter of credit or performance bond questions to be answered. All of this is discussed in the application guide. And then, of course, it is in Section 11 of the application. Can I have the next slide? The questions that have been removed because they are no longer permitted by the policy notice are found in various parts of sections 1 through 10, and you'll see those are noted in the application guide and in the change log so that you know what those are. And as I said before, if you responded in the first round of Bead and provided answers to those questions that have now been eliminated, those answers will obviously be disregarded. Can I have the next slide? This is really just a checklist of the updated documents and templates that are relevant to the benefit of the bargain round so that you have in one place the list of items. It includes the application guide, which is a clean application guide for the benefit of the bargain round. There is a redlined version of that application guide, so you can see in redline very clearly what the changes are from the earlier iteration of Bead that was undertaken by the CPUC in the spring. It has the new scoring rubric, data about CAIs, data about Bead eligible broadband serviceable locations, an application checklist, a template for the required pro forma, a template for the required budget narrative, templates for the surety bond and a letter of commitment, template for the certifications and licenses, templates for locations, the locations list, instructions for submitting no bead locations as discussed in some detail in the application guide, an officer attestation template for the network diagram, and then finally those templates and instruction manuals for submitting information about the different technologies to provide evidence to enable the CPUC to determine whether a given project meets the definition of priority. Can I have the next slide, please? Final reminders on the next slide. Obviously, pre-qualification was a necessary prerequisite, and that window has now closed. Please read the application guide. It is designed to make this easier for you as you go through the process. And please also be aware that there may not be time for any kinds of revisions. And so applications should be complete and accurate when they are submitted to receive full consideration. And the next slide. Here is the address at which you can submit questions that will be answered through an FAQ. And I will turn this back over to Jonathan now.
Thank you very much, Joanne, for a comprehensive review. As we have learned, there have been a lot of changes to the program. We encourage anyone who's interested in participating in the program to read the application guide. It answers most, if not all, of your questions. We will be hosting office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays starting next week for the next 2 weeks. So that's Tuesdays at 1 p.m. and Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. There will be an announcement going out today with registration links, along with an announcement when all the materials are up on our Bead CPUC web, the Bead portion of the CPUC's website. I do want to remind folks that we are working on a very compressed time frame. NTIA gave states 90 days from issuance of the policy restructuring notice to submit their final proposals, and that date is September 4th. So we are working on an exceptionally limited time frame. I've seen there's been a number of questions in the Q&A. Most, if not all, of those questions are answered in our application guide. We will be posting the slides from this webinar along with recording as soon as we can. Hopefully we will have the slides up early next week and the recording the webinar within a day or two after that. Next slide, please. There are, in the slides here and also on our website, there are links to the NTIA Bead Restructuring Policy Notice, which Joanne mentioned, and I recommend that people also read it to see the policy direction that NTIA is taking the program, and we are posting additional information as during the course of the day at our CPUC Bead subgrantee selection process. And with that, that concludes our webinar today. We look forward to seeing everyone at our office hours next week, and please submit your questions. Thank you very much.